Val Kilmer died on April 1st, 2025, at his Los Angeles home. He was 65 years old. His daughter, Mercedes Kilmer, confirmed to the New York Times and Associated Press that the cause was pneumonia. Kilmer had battled throat cancer since 2014 and underwent treatments that permanently damaged his voice. According to the death certificate released by the Los Angeles County Department of Health, Kilmer's immediate cause of death was pneumonia. Underlying causes included acute hypoxemic respiratory failure, chronic respiratory failure, and squamous cell carcinoma of the base of the tongue. Contributing factors included malnutrition and a tracheocutaneous fistula. Kilmer was cremated on April 7th. Val Edward Kilmer was born on December 31st, 1959 in Los Angeles, California. He was the second of three sons to Gladys Swanette Eckstadt and Eugene Doris Kilmer, an industrialist and developer. His mother was of Swedish descent, and his father's ancestry included Irish, German, and Cherokee roots. His parents divorced in 1968 when he was 8 years old. In 1977, when Kilmer was 15, his younger brother Wesley drowned in a hot tub accident. The tragedy marked him deeply. Kilmer later discussed how the loss shaped his understanding of mortality and gave him fearlessness. Kilmer was raised with Christian Science beliefs, which he maintained for most of his life. At 17, Kilmer became the youngest person ever accepted into the Juilliard School's drama division, at the time he attended. After Juilliard, Kilmer's first major film role came in 1984 with Top Secret, a spy spoof from the creators of Airplane. He followed with Real Genius in 1985, playing a brilliant but rebellious college student. In 1986, Kilmer was offered the part of Tom "Iceman" Kazansky in Top Gun. In his memoir, I'm Your Huckleberry, Kilmer wrote that he didn't want the part and didn't care about the film. His agent, who also represented Tom Cruise, persuaded him to meet with director Tony Scott. Kilmer eventually took the role but brought his method acting approach to the set, purposely avoiding Cruise and Anthony Edwards to play up the rivalry between Iceman and Maverick off-screen as well as on. Top Gun became a massive hit, grossing over $344 million worldwide. Kilmer was officially a star. In 1991, Kilmer played Jim Morrison in Oliver Stone's The Doors, a performance so committed that people on set questioned whether he was acting or had lost himself in the role. Stone later said Kilmer was passionate about his work, but with the wrong approach, one might see a side of him they didn't like. In 1993, Kilmer played Doc Holliday in Tombstone. Though Kurt Russell was the lead, Kilmer's performance is still considered one of the greatest supporting performances in Western cinema. Screenwriter Kevin Jarre, who was also the film's original director, said there was a dark side to Kilmer, but couldn't deny his talent. By 1995, Kilmer was in high demand. He starred in Heat alongside Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. Then came Batman Forever. Director Joel Schumacher was replacing Michael Keaton as Batman, and wanted someone who could bring depth to Bruce Wayne while looking credible in the cape and cowl. He had heard warnings about Kilmer but had worked with difficult actors before. He cast Kilmer anyway. From the beginning on the Batman Forever set, tensions existed. Kilmer was going through a divorce from actress Joanne Whalley and was emotionally raw. He had strong opinions about how Batman should be played. According to Entertainment Weekly, Kilmer clashed with the first assistant director, the cameraman, and the costume department. Schumacher described him as childish and impossible. Schumacher and Kilmer got into what the director described as a physical pushing match. Schumacher told Entertainment Weekly that Kilmer was being irrational and ballistic with crew members, was badly behaved, rude, and inappropriate. Schumacher said he was forced to tell Kilmer this would not be tolerated for one more second. After the confrontation, Kilmer didn't speak to Schumacher for 2 weeks. Schumacher later said those 2 weeks were bliss. When Batman Forever was released in June 1995, it was a commercial success, grossing $336 million worldwide. Behind the scenes, Kilmer's behavior had created problems. Warner Brothers wanted him for the sequel, Batman and Robin. A clause in his contract locked him in for a second film. When a potential scheduling conflict arose between Batman and Robin and another film Kilmer was shooting called The Saint, Kilmer indicated he might not be able to do it. He expected Warner Brothers to push back the production schedule. They released him from his contract and hired George Clooney instead. Schumacher later said Kilmer sort of quit and they sort of fired him, depending on who was telling the story. Kilmer maintained he chose not to return because he predicted Batman and Robin would be a disaster. The film was critically panned. By walking away, Kilmer had burned a bridge in Hollywood. After Batman Forever, Kilmer signed on for The Island of Dr. Moreau in 1996. The production was troubled before Kilmer arrived. Original director Richard Stanley had been fired. Marlon Brando was making unusual demands on set. According to those present, Kilmer was insufferable. Director John Frankenheimer, who replaced Stanley, told reporters he didn't like Kilmer, didn't like his work ethic, and didn't want to be associated with him ever again. Frankenheimer reportedly said there were two things he would never do: climb Mount Everest and work with Kilmer again. According to Joel Schumacher, Brando threw Kilmer's cell phone into the bushes and told him not to confuse his ego with the size of his salary. By the late 1990s, Kilmer had developed a reputation that preceded him. Studios were wary. Directors didn't want to work with him. In 1996, Entertainment Weekly ran a piece titled, "Val Kilmer Makes Enemies in Hollywood." Schumacher went on record saying he was tired of defending overpaid, overprivileged actors and prayed he wouldn't work with Kilmer again. Roles started diminishing. Kilmer was still getting work, but they weren't A-list projects. By the early 2000s, Kilmer had become a cautionary tale in Hollywood about what happens when one doesn't play the game. In his 2021 documentary, Val, Kilmer addressed his reputation. "I have behaved poorly," he admitted. "I have behaved bravely. I have behaved bizarrely to some. I deny none of this and have no regrets." He saw himself as fighting for artistic integrity in a system that prioritized profit over art. In 2014, Kilmer was scheduled to perform his one-man show, Citizen Twain, where he portrayed Mark Twain. He had to cancel. He had lost his voice and noticed a lump in his throat. It had become hard to swallow. Kilmer didn't immediately seek medical attention. Given his Christian Science background, which emphasizes spiritual healing over medical intervention, going to a doctor went against his beliefs. Kilmer prayed, believing he could heal himself. In January 2015, Kilmer woke suddenly, vomiting blood. He described the scene in his memoir as looking like something from The Godfather. The bed was covered in blood. He prayed immediately and called 911. At the hospital, doctors discovered the lump in Kilmer's throat was cancer. The diagnosis was devastating, but Kilmer initially kept it private. When hospitalized, his representative said he was undergoing tests for a possible tumor. But Kilmer took to Facebook to deny he'd had operations. He wasn't ready to face reality. For someone whose career depended on his voice and ability to communicate and express emotion, throat cancer was a particularly cruel diagnosis. Treatments were brutal. Kilmer underwent chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and 2 tracheotomies. A tracheotomy is a surgical procedure creating an opening in the windpipe with insertion of a tube to help breathing. The procedure damaged Kilmer's vocal cords, leaving him unable to speak easily. For years, Kilmer kept the extent of his illness secret. In 2016, Michael Douglas inadvertently mentioned Kilmer's cancer diagnosis in an interview, forcing Kilmer to address it publicly. He initially pushed back, saying reports were misinformed and claiming on Facebook he had no cancer whatsoever. He wasn't ready to accept what was happening. By 2017, the truth was impossible to hide. The Hollywood Reporter revealed that Kilmer had endured a 2-year battle with throat cancer and that a procedure on his trachea had reduced his voice to a rasp and rendered him short of breath. To speak, Kilmer had to plug an electric voice box into his trachea. In a 2020 interview with Good Morning America, Kilmer addressed his condition with humor. When asked what he missed about losing his voice, he said he missed having one and that he didn't laugh like a pirate. By 2021, Kilmer reported he had been cancer-free for 4 years. However, the damage was permanent. His voice was altered. He relied on a feeding tube for nutrition. Treatments had taken an enormous physical toll. In 2021, a documentary about Kilmer's life premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. Simply titled Val, the film was co-directed by Ting Pu and Leo Scott and featured decades of footage Kilmer had shot himself. He had been one of the first actors to carry a video camera documenting his life and career from the inside. The documentary was raw, honest, and deeply moving. It showed Kilmer at his best and worst, his brilliance on set, his conflicts with directors, his struggle with cancer, and his refusal to give up on his craft. Critics called it one of the most intimate portraits of an actor ever made. It later won 2 Critics' Choice Documentary Awards. In 2022, Tom Cruise was making Top Gun: Maverick, the long-awaited sequel to the 1986 original. Cruise wanted Kilmer to return as Iceman. Producer Jerry Bruckheimer later revealed Cruise was adamant about it. Cruise told them he wasn't making the movie without Kilmer. Bruckheimer said Cruise was the driving force in making it happen. Back in 1986, Kilmer didn't want to be in Top Gun. He avoided Cruise on set. But 36 years later, it was Cruise who refused to make the sequel without him. When they filmed their reunion scene, it was incredibly emotional. Director Joseph Kosinski said it was a very emotional day having Kilmer there and seeing him work with Cruise after 35 years. These 2 brilliant actors were going at it, and it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Cruise later admitted he cried while filming the scene. It was like time had not passed, Cruise said. We were laughing, and it was joyous. And then we started acting, and he became Iceman. In the film, Iceman has become a 4-star admiral and commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. The scene between Maverick and Iceman is mostly silent because Kilmer could no longer speak easily. The emotion, history, and brotherhood between these 2 characters and actors came through in every frame. Kilmer used AI technology to enhance his voice for the role, working with a company called Sonantic that created a digital recreation of his voice using archived recordings. Audiences worldwide were moved to tears by Kilmer's brief but powerful appearance. Top Gun: Maverick became one of the biggest hits of 2022, grossing over $1.49 billion worldwide. It was vindication for Kilmer. After years of being told he was difficult, after years of being sidelined, after surviving cancer that should have ended his career, Kilmer got to stand before the world one more time as Iceman. When the film was released, Kilmer posted a photo of himself and Cruise from the movie with the caption, "36 years later, I'm still your wingman," followed by a heart emoji. Following Kilmer's death, Cruise paid tribute at CinemaCon. "I'd like to honor a dear friend of mine, Val Kilmer," Cruise said. "I can't tell you how much I admire his work, how grateful and honored I was when he joined Top Gun and came back later for Top Gun: Maverick. He loved movies, and he gave a lot to all of us with his performances." Cruise asked the audience for a moment of silence, then said directly to his late friend, "I wish you well on the next journey." Director Michael Mann, who worked with Kilmer on Heat, wrote, "While working with Val on Heat, I always marveled at the range, the brilliant variability within the powerful current of Val's possessing and expressing character. After so many years of Val battling disease and maintaining his spirit, this is tremendously sad news." Even Schumacher, before his own death in 2020, had softened his stance on Kilmer. In later interviews, he praised Kilmer's performance as Batman, calling him fabulous and saying he thought Kilmer brought real depth to the role. Kilmer left behind an incredible legacy. Over his career, he appeared in films that grossed more than $3.85 billion worldwide. He created iconic characters that will live on forever: Doc Holliday, Jim Morrison, Iceman, Batman, Chris Shiherlis from Heat. In 1992, film critic Roger Ebert wrote, "If there is an award for the most unsung leading man of his generation, Kilmer should get it." That observation proved prophetic. Kilmer was incredibly talented, but also his own worst enemy. His refusal to compromise cost him opportunities. His difficult behavior burned bridges. Yet he never stopped being brilliant. Kilmer is survived by his 2 children, Mercedes and Jack Kilmer, both actors. Mercedes appeared with her father in the film Pay Dirt in 2020, and Jack narrated parts of the documentary Val. Both have spoken about their pride in their father's courage facing his illness and willingness to be vulnerable sharing his story. Kilmer was difficult. The stories are too consistent from too many sources to be dismissed. Directors who had worked with notoriously challenging actors said Kilmer was in a league of his own. He was demanding, confrontational, and often unwilling to take direction. In an industry built on collaboration, that's a serious problem. But Kilmer was also fighting for something. In a Hollywood system that often prioritizes marketability over artistry, Kilmer refused to just cash the check and read the lines. He pushed for deeper character work. He challenged directors when he thought they were making wrong choices. He saw himself as an artist first and a movie star second. The problem is one cannot succeed in Hollywood on talent alone. Relationships are needed, goodwill is needed. People who want to work with you again are needed. By the time Kilmer realized this, he had already burned too many bridges to rebuild them all. There's something tragic about Kilmer's voice, the very thing that made him special as an actor, being taken from him by cancer. This man who spent his career speaking truth to power, who refused to be silenced by studio executives and difficult directors, was ultimately silenced by his own body. But in the end, people who mattered remembered Kilmer for his talent, not his temperament. Crews, who had every reason to hold a grudge from their time on the first Top Gun, fought to get Kilmer into the sequel. He refused to make the movie without him. Kilmer himself showed incredible growth and self-awareness in his later years. In his documentary and memoir, he didn't make excuses for his behavior. He admitted he had behaved poorly, he acknowledged his mistakes, he showed humility that had been absent during much of his career. The final image of Kilmer is him in Top Gun Maverick, unable to speak but still commanding the screen with his presence and eyes. That's the power of a truly great actor. Even when his voice was gone, he could still move audiences to tears. Kilmer's story is a reminder that genius and difficulty often go hand in hand, but one doesn't excuse the other. It's a story about the cost of uncompromising artistic vision in an industry that demands compromise. It's a story about redemption, second chances, and the bonds between artists that can survive decades and overcome massive obstacles. Most of all, it's a story about mortality. Kilmer spent his life being fearless, taking risks, refusing to play it safe. He lived more intensely than most people dream of living. When death finally came, he faced it with the same courage and honesty he brought to everything else. In his documentary, Kilmer said, "I have behaved poorly. I have behaved bravely. I have behaved bizarrely to some. I deny none of this, and have no regrets because I have lost and found parts of myself that I never knew existed. And I am blessed." That's how Kilmer chose to see his life, not as a tragedy, despite all the setbacks, illness, and lost opportunities, but as a blessing. As an adventure worth taking, consequences be damned.